Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is Shrink Wrapped.
BBC Three Counties Radio.
Hello and welcome to Shrink Wrapped. I'm Sophie Solaria.
And I'm Dr. Chetna Kang. And coming up, a third of us suffer from a sleep disorder, most commonly insomnia.
Lack of sleep can have an impact on our mental and physical health, and there are many different causes.
Today we'll meet people with a variety of common sleep disorders and find out what you can do to get a good night's sleep.
That's all coming up between now and 2.
Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is BBC Three Counties Radio.
Good afternoon, Chetna.
Hi, how are you doing, Sophie?
Yeah, I'm all right. Have you had a good night's sleep?
I did, actually.
Well, I haven't, and so I'm going to learn a lot this hour. Chetna, I'm not actually surprised that a third of the people in this world don't sleep well, because I don't. I find it very difficult, especially when I've got something running through my mind or I've got a concern. What causes us not to sleep?
I mean, there's lots of causes to not sleep well. The most common is stress. You know, when we're under stress, we struggle to get off to sleep. The quality of sleep we have, it tends to be poorer because our mind will be constantly racing, ruminating about that thought. So stress is probably the most common cause of sleeplessness or difficulties with sleep. Thankfully, it's usually short-lived when it's related to stress. So once your stress passes, then you usually find that your body and mind tend to regain their usual sleep patterns. Some medications can cause problems with sleep. Physical illnesses. So if you have a chronic health problem, variety of neurological conditions, heart disease, they can also make it difficult for people to fall asleep. If you have chronic pain, we know mental health problems, some of them are associated with poor sleep. Now you look at something like depression, not being able to sleep, fall asleep quickly or waking up too early is very common with a condition like depression. And one of the reasons that happens is our body's natural way to lift the mood is to stay awake. And so when you start to feel low, your body will naturally go in that direction to keep you awake because it rebalances your feel-good hormones. But of course, in clinical depression, this goes too far. And of course, then we get the other symptoms of depression. And then, of course, another common one actually is drugs and alcohol. You might be using alcohol to help you sleep, but actually in the long term it ends up damaging your body's own ability to fall asleep.
And so what's the most common sleep problem, Chetna?
Okay, so the most common sleep problem is insomnia. Insomnia can either be difficulty getting off to sleep or difficulty staying asleep, or you might have both. So that is by far the most common sleep problem people will encounter. The next most common is probably sleep apnea. So that's an obstruction in the airway when you're sleeping. It's most commonly picked up by your partner as loud snoring. And what happens is your airways intermittently close. So you actually stop breathing. Because you stop breathing, that wakes you up. You fall back to sleep. But imagine if that happens multiple times in the night that you've woken up. You don't know you've woken up. You just think it's normal snoring. And then you wake up feeling very, very tired. And then you also have rarer conditions like narcolepsy, which is a disorder where you fall asleep anytime, any place, and restless leg syndrome, where literally it's usually the legs, but it can be any part of your body. They become restless. You try and sleep and you can't stop moving them.
So annoying.
Yeah. Some people get this to an extreme point where it could even be associated with pain and cramps, and it can really, really interfere with their sleep.
It must be quite damaging, all of this, not just physically, but mentally. What can sleep deprivation do to you?
Now, most of us can manage a couple of nights without really feeling it. We can manage a couple of nights of not sleeping well, and then we find our feet again and we're okay. If it's been going on for months and weeks, the effects can really be quite significant. So just overall, not sleeping well can increase your risk of diabetes, your risk of heart disease, your risk of high blood pressure. Okay? When we don't sleep well, we also increase our risk of mood disorders. So, for example, you're more likely to feel anxious, you're more likely to feel low if you're not sleeping well. Anybody who hasn't slept well for even a week will start to notice that they start feeling a bit down. And you almost feel teary that, gosh, I could really I just want to sleep. Reduces your motivation. And it really affects your concentration and your ability to process information. So for all of us out there who pull late nighters for work, thinking, I'll just get it done tonight, so that I don't have to do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you keep doing that, what you're doing in the daytime at work will suffer. And you'll end up taking longer to do the same amount of work and end up becoming just more and more sleep deprived. So if you can do anything, and even if you're studying for exams, just get a good night's sleep. It'll be worth it in the end.
Thank you, Chetna. Let's meet our first guest. Dr. Patrick Zulakowski is a sleep consultant at the Lister Hospital in Stevenage, and he joins us now. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good morning.
Do you mind if we start by talking about common sleep disorders? Now, you run a sleep clinic. Can you explain a little bit about what that is?
All right. I personally run a sleep clinic at the Lister Hospital in Stevenage, and I see a wide range of different sleep disorders, including sleep apnea, insomnia, even restless legs syndrome. So there's really a wide range, a very long list. I would make you bored here, just explaining what all disorders can be.
Doctor, in my head, thinking about the sleep clinic in the Lister Hospital, there are lots of comfy beds and lots of people asleep while doctors watch them behind a glass. Am I near to being correct?
Yes,
Wow.
to a degree. I would say in my clinic I have obviously predominantly outpatients, so people who really suffer at their homes. We try in hospital, we try to improve the patient's quality of sleep, and I'm also a member of the group looking at particularly noise at night to improve the inpatient's quality of sleep. But I would say majority of my work is actually outpatients with sleep problems.
So tell us, what do you normally get referred to? Is it mostly insomnia?
No, not really. I would say still a majority of the problems is sleep apnea, insomnia as well, also parasomnias and narcolepsy, and finally restless leg syndrome. So again, a wide variety of sleep disorders.
But insomnia is the most common.
Yes.
Would you say that would be managed outside of a sleep clinic?
I try to manage these patients actually in my clinics. So we do not have a local CBT, what I mean is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia service. So what I try to apply CBT techniques during the consultation.
Now, I understand what insomnia is. Essentially, you can't sleep at night. Is that correct?
Yes.
Keeps you awake?
There are two types of insomnia. Obviously, one is when you go to bed and you struggle to fall asleep, and the second type is when you manage to fall asleep, but then you struggle to maintain sleep. And what is very frequent, that people wake up early in the morning and they cannot drop off to sleep again.
And then you've got sleep apnea. Now, can you explain a bit more about that for me?
Sleep apnea is very different. We are talking about the people who feel excessively sleepy, who actually stop breathing during the night. It is characterized that simply they have disrupted breathing pattern, and it simply causes that the patient's body briefly wakes up to restore normal breathing. And I'm afraid it may prevent them from enjoying a good night's rest. So in the morning when they wake up, they feel really tired and exhausted, definitely not refreshed.
Are there any or particular things that make you at more risk of developing sleep apnea?
Oh yes, definitely obesity or overweight. I would say in general more than 70% of patients with sleep apnea are overweight, but also male gender. Interestingly also smoking, drinking alcohol at night, but also some endocrinological conditions. What I mean is acromegaly, or Cushing's disease. So these are hormonal disorders which can also contribute to development of sleep apnea.
How easily is that treated, Doctor?
The gold standard treatment for sleep apnea is CPAP, which stands for continuous positive airway pressure. It's a sort of ventilator, small machine, which pumps air under pressure via tube and mask, which patient applies every night when they go to bed.
So before people get to the point of using a CPAP machine, which I understand is the last resort, what other things can they do before they go down that road to help them, with the sleep apnea?
Okay, majority of our patients are sleep deprived, so we obviously advise them to have sufficient number of sleep during the night. What is also important to try to lose weight when they are overweight or obese. When sleep apnea is very severe, then even this general treatment measure, they can contribute to improvement, but they will not sort out the problem completely, I'm afraid.
Well, what about with knowing that you have sleep apnea? Is it something that an individual will notice themselves, or is it a family member who usually notices?
No, I'm afraid the role of partner is very important. So if you don't have a bad partner, it may be very difficult to come to this conclusion that I may suffer from sleep apnea. What I see, I get referrals from really specialists in different fields, because these patients go to CGPs and complain of chronic fatigue, tiredness, lack of energy. Sometimes I get referrals from memory clinics because these patients also have problems with concentration, with memory. Sometimes psychiatrists refer this patient because very often they suffer from mood swings and depression. And I could continue telling you who refer these patients to me. Very often even hematologists, because they find to have very thick blood, or even cardiologists, because very often these patients have resistant hypertension, which means very high blood pressure, which is resistant to even several drugs.
And then, of course, there's narcolepsy.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know much about that either. Would you mind explaining?
Narcolepsy is not a very common condition. It affects roughly 4 individuals per 10,000, and it's more prevalent in men than in women. There's a sort of familial tendency, and this condition has 4 main clinical features. First is sleepiness, and these people have ability to fall asleep in unusual as well as usual circumstances, such as standing, walking, cycling, skiing, and even during intercourse.
What?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
So you can fall asleep anywhere at any point?
Yeah, exactly. And the sleep attacks, they can last 10, 30 minutes. But there's a wide range from a few seconds to several hours. So it is one feature, but there is also cataplexy, which means a sudden decrease or loss of voluntary muscle tone. And usually it is precipitated by emotion, particularly laughter, surprise, or even anger. And finally, these patients often experience what we call hypnagogic hallucinations. So it means at sleep onset, they have hallucinations. They just can see things which obviously are unreal. And finally, very often they complain of sleep paralysis. So they wake up in the morning and they are not able to move, and it can last for a few minutes, seconds, and they find it really terrifying, because obviously you cannot move and you're aware that you are awake.
Wow.
Patrick, is there any effective treatment for narcolepsy and cataplexy?
There are pharmacological and non-pharmacological approaches. In terms of non-pharmacological approaches, is to make sure that these patients get sufficient amount of sleep. If they are sleep deprived, it is the worst of what can happen. So very often we plan naps during the day. And finally, there's also a pharmacological approach. There are different drugs, amongst others is modafinil. So they are like wakefulness-promoting drugs.
Which one of these is the hardest to treat, or are they all quite difficult to deal with?
I think narcolepsy can be sort of a challenging condition. Sleep apnea, in majority of the patients, we get a very good control with treatment options. I mentioned about CPAP, but there are other treatment options like intraoral devices. We call them mandibular advancement splints. So with these devices or with CPAP, in majority of patients we achieve very good compliance and very good treatment effects. So these patients feel refreshed and they just feel back to the normal life. Very often they say that they forgot already what the normal life and normal levels of energy meant to them.
Doctor, this has been fascinating. We're going to learn more throughout the hour. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Now, as Dr. Patrick was explaining to us, obstructive sleep apnea is a condition that affects around 4% of middle-aged men and 2% of middle-aged women in the UK. Now, Chris Rogers joins us on the line, and he's from the Sleep Apnea Trust, which works to improve the lives of sleep apnea patients. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Now, tell me about your experience of sleep apnea.
Right, I was diagnosed in 2000, and went on to CPAP in very early 2001 following a total collapse of health in which I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, very high blood pressure. There was a bit of depression as well, but bearing in mind that I was in a very prominent job in the motor industry in Europe and spent quite a lot of time driving cars around and even testing cars, it was a hell of a shock. And the sleep apnea was just a sort of icing on the cake. So I thought life had changed permanently, but I was wrong.
When did you discover you had sleep apnea? Was it something you noticed? Did someone who shares a bed with you notice?
Initially, my snoring for many years before was so loud. I was pushed to furthest point of the house where people couldn't hear me, and it got so bad that in the late 90s, people in my company, for whom I was responsible for their employment, wouldn't even stay in the same hotel as me.
Same hotel?
Oh my God. Yes.
Goodness me, Chris.
The snoring was dreadful, and of course, I was stopping breathing. So they were maybe in, a room next door to me, even in a modern hotel, they could hear my snoring, and then I'd stop breathing. So they were starting to get worried about me. So he got completely crazy. And then, luckily, excellent GP in Swindon referred me to Oxford, and I was diagnosed.
I mean, how many years would you say you'd been suffering with sleep apnea before you actually got diagnosed?
10, 15 years.
My goodness me.
And that whole time you'd been suffering with poor sleep?
Poor sleep, ex-rugby player.
Yeah.
I used to think, because I'm a sort of, a Thatcher kid, I suppose, there was this Prime Minister who used to catnap, and I used to catnap all the time. Like, literally in a meeting, I'd catnap.
Thatcher made it acceptable.
I think a lot of us thought that surviving on 2 to 3 hours sleep a night was normal because we catnapped during the day, and we didn't realise that it was actually probably slowly killing us.
So once you were diagnosed, Chris, what was your first steps to sort of health again, getting better? What did they prescribe?
I went on to CPAP in January 2001.
Which is the oxygen mask on front of the face, is that right?
It's not an oxygen mask, no, it's a small pump that pumps air at just very gentle pressure through the nose and through the mouth into the back of the throat, and it keeps the airway open, so it stops the collapse occurring that causes the apnea. My apneas, I used to have about 60 to 70 an hour.
Wow, really?
So you snore loudly, you stop breathing, you wake up. You snore loudly, stop breathing, wake up. And
when did you notice a difference with the CPAP machine? Was it something you noticed immediately?
Yes.
So
within one day.
Within a day.
What did you notice? Yeah.
I suddenly got up feeling I got a spring in my step.
Oh, so you were tired. You were overtired for 15 years.
Yeah, 3 days.
Wow.
3 days, and I just could not believe the difference. And people really noticed.
Well, that's because you stopped snoring, I guess.
What's happened,
They wanted to sleep near you again.
Yeah.
How many years have you been sleeping well for now?
I've been sleeping well since 2001.
Wow.
And I'm very grateful to all the people that helped me do that, and of course being able to continue driving as well.
I mean, sleep deprivation in itself can increase people's risk of diabetes, high blood pressure.
Yes.
Have those things improved? Has your general health improved?
Yes, general health has improved enormously. I'm still overweight, which is probably why I'm still on a CPAP machine. But the new machines are incredible, and the new masks are incredible as well.
Have they told you if you lose weight that you might be able to rid yourself of the mask?
I have lost a little bit of weight, and you notice it because the pressure, I have an auto machine, and the pressure has dropped slightly. The worst thing is having a glass of wine at 9 o'clock at night, where the pressure increases by about 30%. So it adapts to the level of apnea that I would be having, and keeps the airway open.
Now, Chris, tell us a bit about the Sleep Apnea Trust.
Yeah, we're a patient support charity run mainly by patient volunteers, and we were actually the main campaigning charity that put so much pressure on NICE to actually get for treatment free on the NHS. And it arose out of a centre of excellence for sleep apnea in Oxford under a chap called Professor John Stradling. where he was one of several centres in the UK that really pioneered the CPAP treatment in Britain, having been developed in Australia. But it was all done on a private basis. So I was lucky to have private medicine. So we campaigned, knowing that there were many, many people that had this affliction. We campaigned, and in March 2008, the NICE guideline was published, and this has led to the real explosion of sleep clinics in all the major hospitals. So treatment is now available in most major, like the Lister in Stevenage. It's excellent hospital.
And how quickly can people get the right treatment? Because I imagine you said you worked in the motor industry, and people have jobs where being tired actually doesn't just put them at risk, but other people's lives at risk. So getting treatment quickly is really, really important. Would you say the turnaround time is relatively good?
It varies. It's very much a postcode lottery. Places like the Lister will do fast tracking for people whose, vocational drivers whose job depends upon them keeping a licence. But we've actually just started a campaign along with the RAC, the British Lung Foundation, DVLA are involved, Freight Transport Association involved, lots and lots of people to actually make fast tracking for people who drive lots and lots of miles, like truck drivers, that they can get fast-tracked within 4 weeks, because there's a real fear that they might lose their jobs if they tell their employer they've got an affliction that might stop them from driving. So they don't refer themselves to the GP because they don't know how long they're going to be off the road.
Chris, how do people listening who feel a bit tired but they don't want to immediately jump to the idea that they've got sleep apnea find out that they have a problem?
Right. There's a thing called the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, or another scale called OSA 50. Now, you can download these documents from our website, which is www.sleepapneatrust.org. If you Google it, you'll find it.
And we'll put it on our website as well.
You can make an assessment. You have a questionnaire that asks when you, if you are suffering from excessive sleepiness, and if your score is over 10, then you take the document, you go to your GP and say, look, I think I've got a sleep disorder. And then your GP will maybe do some further tests, and then if you are obviously suffering from a sleep disorder, refer you then to the local hospital sleep clinic. And there, our feeling is that certainly if you're a professional driver, within 4 weeks you should be treated.
Okay. And we'll
That's
put
the
those...
basis of our campaign, and what we're trying to do now with the Department of Health is to get them to introduce this 4-week wait for vocational drivers, because if you're a driver of a 40-ton truck, you don't want to be asleep at the wheel.
If you're not a driver, what's the usual turnaround time?
It varies. It can be very quick in some areas. In other areas, it can be as long as 6 months, which is not acceptable at all. But the problem was the original NICE guideline didn't contain a time frame. Sure. The crazy thing is that for hospital trusts, the cost of treating an obstructive sleep apnea patient is about half the cost of not treating them. Because
Really?
You don't have to deal with the stroke, the heart attack, the diabetes, the other comorbidities, they're called, it's a horrible word, that occur because of the sleep apnea. So for hospital trusts, it's a win-win situation.
It's cheaper to see you quickly.
Much cheaper to see you quickly, to get you diagnosed and to get you healthy again.
Chris, we're going to put those details of the Sleep Apnea Trust on our website as well, which is bbc.co.uk/3 Counties Radio.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
Across beds, hearts and bucks.
This is Shrink Wrapped.
BBC 3 Counties Radio.
Monday Night Sport is a sports programme unlike any other.
I love going somewhere where the sport takes place.
Go to the judo club in Aylesbury where he almost got strangled to death.
He's just about to get flung in the air and crash to the floor.
Oh! Yes, it is about sport, but it's also about us two having a bit of a giggle at the same time.
Anywhere on the green, he's got one over on Lucy, the US Open competitor. Oh, it's I think we can see that.
We've had some great ones.
I thought the wakeboarding was just tremendous. 'Cause
Yeah.
that is so far out of our comfort zone.
I don't quite know how I fell off, but I think it was something to do with the balance.
And of course, you can see all the videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/BBC3CR.
Three Counties Sport on BBC Three Counties Radio.
Which is a part of narcolepsy, but cataplexy comes from the Greek for being struck down. It's where your brain effectively switches your body to sleep, and you collapse, a bit like a puppet having all its strings cut. So you have complete muscle atonia as if you were asleep, which is obviously quite difficult to deal with if you're standing up.
Can I just go back? So you said you were diagnosed at 40. Were you born?
43.
Were you born with this condition, or did it develop, or how did you know?
I didn't know. I just thought I was tired.
And for how long was
exhausted. I would say, a good probably 18 months progressively.
So before your 40s, you hadn't had episodes of cataplexy or narcolepsy, and you hadn't experienced that. So it's something that you developed later on in life.
I couldn't even sleep in the day.
Wow.
Right.
So on a some people go away on a nice hot holiday and they like a snooze in the afternoon. I could never do that.
And then all of a sudden, you just got really tired a lot.
Yeah. I used to go into the city on a train. I'd instead of reading a book, which I always used to do, I'd just nod off, fall asleep. And it just became worse and worse. And it was the same. I'd be sitting at home and I wouldn't just fall asleep. My head would, physically jerk and bob.
I mean, the cataplexy is what probably makes it more dramatic to the onlooker, is that you literally flop, don't you? Your body completely loses all tone and muscle tone.
Yeah.
So you said you got diagnosed when you were 43. Was it quick?
The diagnosis was fairly quick in the end, but as I was feeling tired, a common misdiagnosis for narcolepsy is depression, because when you go to your GP and you start to say, I'm feeling, very sleepy, I'm working quite hard, I can't stay awake, one of the first things people start to talk to you about is, well, do you think you may be a bit depressed? And one of the medications that is currently used to combat cataplexy is antidepressants. Some of the more modern antidepressants, like the selective serotonin
reuptake inhibitors.
Inhibitors. So I was in a position where I said, okay, I'll try. I don't feel particularly depressed, but we'll give it a go. And what's really interesting for me is I think that I stayed on them for a while, and as I felt less and less sure that was what the problem was, I came off them, and it was probably within 2 to 4 weeks of coming off them that my cataplexy kicked in. So my narcolepsy was developing, and potentially the antidepressants were masking the cataplexy, and then all of a sudden it hit me. But it actually hit me on a Saturday. But the Wednesday before that, I'd actually visited a consultant neurologist who listened to what I had to say and diagnosed me literally in the room.
Now, I understand a little bit more about what narcolepsy is and cataplexy, but can you explain exactly how it affected your day-to-day life? So when you fell asleep and when this happened to you?
I would fall asleep anywhere. More often than not when I'm on my own. So if, for example, it's nice and warm in here, if you were to just leave me in this comfy chair, I would sleep.
But would it be, for example, during a conversation like this?
That's one of the occasions where I'm unlikely to fall asleep. There's a test called the Epworth Sleepiness Test, and that's one of the questions: are you likely to fall asleep when talking to people? And for me, that's the lesser. But anything else, sitting down after a meal.
What about standing up? Because that can happen.
Yeah, I can do that.
Is your cataplexy generally associated with you falling asleep, or do you get the cataplexy separately? And does it come on with laughing or anxiety? Because sometimes it can be emotional.
It's an absolute emotional trigger.
Okay.
So it's a very bizarre thing, and there are some circumstances where it's funny, some where it's not so funny. But for me, it's very much emotion based. So when you read about narcolepsy, it talks about laughter. But it's more than that. If I knew you well enough, it would be before we got to the laughter stage. So if we were having fun, it would be as I begin to think of my comeback to you, I would probably have cataplexy.
But you're awake during the cataplexy?
Absolutely awake. Yeah.
So it's actually when you're just about to hit a punchline in a joke, for example, you could just flop.
Yes.
Gosh, I mean,
or I'm just having fun. I mean, I've got to the point now where I think if I have cataplexy in front of people, it's actually the highest compliment I could give you, because it means that I am so relaxed and I've let my guard down and I'm not fighting it, because
so we're really
actually
boring
enjoying
then,
myself.
basically.
So far you're boring me, but that could change.
The thing is, though, Matt, I know I feel awful. I think it's quite an amusing problem, but actually, how does it really affect you on a day-to-day basis?
Do you have to go, I don't want to get out for a good time to this place because I'm worried I might flop and nobody will catch me? Because you can hurt yourself really badly.
You can hurt yourself, yeah. And the biggest problem is because of the way that people collapse, i.e. you have complete muscle loss. It feels a bit like someone's hit you behind the knees, and then you go, and very often you don't get a sense that it's coming. So with it being emotional based, some of mine happens through smell.
Okay.
So I was once walking the dog through the village where I live. There was an old woman walking towards me who'd obviously used TCP. TCP is one of those smells that I just associate with, childhood. I never particularly minded the smell. I obviously do now, because she left me hanging onto some railings, or wedged in some railings with the dog as she walked past, because it just triggered.
Oh my gosh!
What is it triggering? What is it triggering? Like an emotion, I guess.
An emotional memory. And that just flicks my sleep switch.
And then how long does it take you to recover from the cataplexy?
It can be seconds. Sometimes I can have repeated episodes. Some of the I think the longest one I had was at the beginning, went on for more or less an hour and a half, where I was kind of unable to move in the kitchen. Was that
because it was very funny, or
it was just
very smelly?
It was just very. I didn't know what it was then. It was just very overpowering, and I wasn't on any medication.
I see. Okay.
Nowadays it can be quite quick. You can recover quite quickly. Sometimes it's just you would just see a drop of my face.
Right. Okay. So it's just a part of your body or face that.
Or I might slur my words.
Are you married, Matt?
Yes.
How does it affect your family?
Don't know. They're not here to answer that question. I think it's very tough. It's very hard on everyone, because it's absolutely impossible to understand if you don't have it. Because it's the combination of being sleep deprived, which makes you very grumpy, and a bit like being a child again. So going for a day out is me with my medication, sleeping. If I get put into a car, I'll normally fall asleep.
So you're not allowed to drive?
I choose not to drive at the moment. People can drive if they're medicated.
I mean, when you talk about falling asleep, is this the kind of sleep anyone can just wake you up from, or is it different?
You don't want to get too close to me when you wake me up, because you don't know where I am.
I don't understand.
So I fall asleep, and immediately I would go into REM sleep, so I'm dreaming.
Right, okay.
So I always advise people to wake me up from a reasonable distance rather than physically wake me up.
What might happen if they woke you up physically?
I can jump, jerk, lash out. Quite often when I wake up, I talk utter rubbish. in the car on the way over, I was telling a story about once going into Marylebone on the train, and I'd fallen asleep because it's a diesel train, and boring fact, but diesel trains make me far more sleepy than electric trains for some reason. But anyway, we were in Marylebone, and I'd been dreaming, and just as the train pulled in and everyone was getting ready to stand up, I shouted out, "Do you know they used real Russians in that film?"
Oh.
And the best thing about London is that everyone completely ignored me, and they just left the train. But I'd been dreaming about an old film of Waterloo where they did use real Russians as extras. That's the kind of thing that can happen to me quite often.
The thing is, you tell these funny stories, and you talk about your narcolepsy in quite a light way, but I also see that it must be quite difficult to live with, and
it's hugely difficult to live with because it stops you doing an awful lot of things.
What have you had to stop doing that you used to enjoy before?
Working.
Wow.
I don't work anymore. The work that I do for the charity is voluntary, but that's hugely important to me because a lot of people will say that narcolepsy doesn't define them, and I kind of agree with that statement. But it's a huge part of my life now. So.
Well, you gave up work, so
Yeah.
that is a massive thing to have to give up.
I don't drive. So I'm limited. You go from being a wholly independent adult to someone who needs a lift to go to the supermarket or has to catch a bus or a train. And of course, public transport, if you're sleepy, is sometimes not the best place to be. Yeah, well, miss your stop, miss your town.
So what do you do with Narcolepsy UK? to help people?
A lot of the work we do is advice and raising awareness, things like this. We also run at least one annual conference every year where we have people along and we have guest speakers, and people have the chance to actually meet other people with narcolepsy, because it's one of those things that can make you very insular, and you know, if people have, you know, I'd say, you know, I guess more or less average narcolepsy and cataplexy, they can be very afraid of going out and potentially injuring themselves. So it can make people quite insular. But we have a big Facebook community which is growing all the time. There are other groups in Europe. There's a large community in the States. We interact with all of them. And I probably have, you know, hundreds of, you know, I'd call them friends now, that I've met just because they have narcolepsy, because when I talk to them, they understand. I mean, they understand without me having to talk to them. Yeah. Which is, you know, it's hugely refreshing.
It's been really, really fascinating to talk to you, Matt. You've really given me an insight into this world of narcolepsy. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Now, it's not just rare neurological conditions that can stop us from getting a good night's sleep. Sometimes life just gets in the way. Now, Richard Bennett is from Aylesbury and hasn't had a good night's sleep for 40 years. Good afternoon, Richard.
Oh, hi, yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, tell us about why you don't sleep very well.
Yeah, that's probably a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I do have a tendency to very rarely get through the night. Got a job to get off to sleep from, you know, when I first go there, and I have a tendency after a couple of hours just to sort of like wake up.
So difficulty falling asleep, and then you wake up before you want to. So typical insomnia.
I tend to sort of get an I don't know, sort of like active mental images during the night that in the end I just sort of like wake me up and stop me from going back off to sleep.
Now, do you have something you attribute your insomnia to?
All I can think of is that the job that I did from 19 years of age was on rotating shift work from early turn, late turn, night shifts, and keep on coming around just doing the circuit like that.
So what did you do, Richard?
I was a police officer.
Right, okay. And what was the cycle like? Were you on nights then days, and was it just a bit confusing?
When I first started, you did a day shift of 6 till 2s, and then you went on to 2 till 10 shifts, and then 10 till 6 in the mornings. usually followed by a changeover when you finished at 6 o'clock in the morning and came back at 2 o'clock.
So they're expecting you to sort of sleep in the day, then in the night, and then the evening, right?
Yeah, just carried on like that. And then the shifts changed after about 10 odd years, so they became all over the place, from like 7s till 4s till 6s till 6 till 2s, and then 10 till 7 o'clock in the morning.
You must have been shattered.
Yeah, I think permanently, yeah.
I mean, a job like being a policeman, you need to be alert for that. You need to be able to concentrate. You guys drive around a lot. And it doesn't take long for the body and the brain to start feeling the effects of sleep deprivation. So how did you cope?
Badly, a lot of the time. I think night shifts used to probably not get into sleep until about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I think if I went on till about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that would be, about an average.
So what's life like now then, Richard? So
I've retired, because I could retire at 55, and now I'm on a more of a normal sort of like sleep cycle, whereby you go to bed at the proper time and wake up when it gets light in the morning. But I'm gradually, after about 5 years, having longer sleeps during the night, but I still have difficulty in wake up during in the middle of the night and have to get myself back off to sleep.
I mean, you've come from a profession where shift work is normal. Was there not any support in the police service for people who had sleep problems because of shift work? Because it's very common amongst professions where there's shift work.
I think it was one of those things that was always accepted.
Are things any different now? Did you see any change over the years?
I don't really have any great contact with the police service since I left.
Right.
I don't think the situation's any better.
Right, okay, so it didn't evolve even during your career? Things didn't improve after 10, 20, 30 years?
No.
What do you do when you wake up in the middle of the night, Richard?
I've got into the habit of putting the radio on.
Okay. I hope it's to us.
My wife sleeps better than what I do, so I tend to just put an earpiece in and listen to Radio 5 or Radio 4 at night.
Does that put you back to sleep?
Yeah. I usually get round about the shipping forecast and get to Finisterre and what have you, and then next time you find yourself listening to something else on like a news report on India or something, and wondering what the hell's going on.
Now, you said you've, over the last 5 years, you've slowly started to regain some normality with your sleep. Have you ever gone to get any other help?
No.
Well, why not? What stopped you?
I don't. I tend to try to work myself through these things. I don't want medication or anything to get myself through.
No.
If I can get through otherwise, and I'm gradually it is. I'm getting better. I don't have to. I go through some nights without having to sort of like wake up and plug myself in, so to speak.
Well, I do know that people or other people that have got insomnia, it tends to come in stages. Sometimes it can last for 3 months and then they'll sleep fine for a little while and then it will come back.
I mean, it depends on the cause of the insomnia as well. When it's due to a lifetime of shift work, it takes longer to get back to normal sleeping patterns.
I think everything, when you're on shifts, you find that you're eating proper meals in the early hours of the morning, where you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I know some guys used to try to keep their life cycle as the same as anybody normally would do, but then others. You have a tendency to sort of having fried meals at the wrong time of day.
Sure. The colleagues of yours who did try to keep their life cycle normal, did they sleep any better?
Well, some people I would manage. You could talk to them and they would say, "Oh, well, I slept through till 6, 7 o'clock this evening."
Right.
But it always seemed with me, I hate being in bed when it's light.
Sure.
And sort of 1, 2 o'clock comes. And I'd wake up and think, no, it's a waste of time being in bed.
It must be quite irritating.
Yeah, you carry on for a certain period of time, and then it just overtakes you a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Are you now able to own it with the recent improvements that you've talked about? Are you starting to feel more refreshed when you wake up in the morning?
Certainly, yes, because my lifestyle's changed completely because the stress that was there. I worked in the custody life, and that over the years, especially around about the time that I finished, got incredibly busy. And so you never got your mind was still active when you got home. So there was never that break of like you get in an evening before you go to sleep, where you have a chance to break and
wind down,
get your mind onto something else.
Yeah.
When you finished at 7 o'clock in the morning and you've had a particularly hectic night, you cut to come home and then try to sleep after that is quite difficult.
Richard, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been
an absolute pleasure.
Chetna, today's been an absolutely fascinating hour, hearing about all these different things that essentially stop us from doing something that should be quite a natural thing to be able to do. What can help us get back into that regular sleep pattern?
Okay, so sleep's not just about what we do at night. Our whole day affects what kind of a night's sleep we're going to have. So let's start with what we do in the daytime. So if you are feeling tired, and you've found yourself, and I'm talking about a situation where you don't already have a diagnosed condition like narcolepsy or sleep apnea. If you're suffering with general insomnia, it's important that if you're tired during the day, you don't take naps, because if you sleep in the day, it's going to be harder to get off to sleep at night time. So don't take naps, resist taking naps. Try and keep yourself active during the day. So you may have a very desk-bound job. A lot of jobs are desk-bound. Try and make sure you do some walking or some exercise, because if you walk and exercise, that is definitely going to help you get off to sleep. The body needs to be used just as much as the mind does, and it also gives the mind a break. Then this brings us to the evening. So this isn't just before sleep, but actually the few hours before sleep, it's important what you do then. So, for example, avoid caffeinated drinks. Okay, you might not be a tea and coffee drinker, but you might be a fizzy drinker. If you drink soft drinks, these days they often do add caffeine or stimulants to the drinks. It's important to at least have 4 to 5 hours gap between the time you want to fall asleep and your last drink, which has got a stimulant in it. The other thing that's important during the evening is to avoid having our evening meal very close to bedtime. So try and work your life in such a way that you have your last meal of the day at least 2 to 3 hours before you go to bed. Because what happens is if you go to bed on a heavy meal, the time when your blood should be flowing all around your body into your brain in a quite an even way, what happens is if you've had a heavy meal, all that blood goes to your gut to digest. So the rest of your body and your brain's deprived. And you'll either wake up feeling very sluggish, or you'll have very heavy dreams, or you'll struggle to fall asleep. And plus, you won't digest your food very well. So try and have a good gap between your last meal and going to bed. And then just before bed, so there's the things you do and there's your actual bed space itself. So winding down before bed, often people think that if they watch a movie, or watch television before going to bed, that's going to help relax them. It helps us relax to a point, but the problem is the content of what we're watching. So if we watch anything which is emotionally exciting, or, and that can be good or bad, or if it's violent, for example, or a horror film, that's going to play on our mind. So it's really important that the half an hour before bed you do something else, even if you have watched a movie. So wind down, you can do deep breathing, you can do some quiet meditation, and then also clear your bedroom. We've really got into a habit of, our bedrooms have become our workspace or our entertainment space. You go to bed shops and they'll sell you a bed with a television screen right at the end of the bed. If you do have a habit of taking your work to bed or entertainment to bed, make sure there's a good gap. So it's not that your lights are out literally seconds after you've sent that last email.
And I've also recently read don't put pictures up, because actually they can stimulate pictures of friends and family and things. And I've actually things that can stimulate and bring you thoughts is also a really bad idea.
Again, it's also what you do with it. We can also choose what we think about our family. Sometimes loving, comforting thoughts also help us to fall asleep. But it is important to keep your bed space associated with sleep, right? Once it becomes your workspace, it is hard for your brain to switch off, because it's harder for your brain to switch off because it's made that association. And there are things to do once you are asleep. Okay. Once you're asleep, if you happen to wake up, it's really important to try and stay stay in bed. Now, if you've woken up because you need to go to the bathroom, by all means go to the bathroom. But stay in bed. One of the most common reasons people can't get back to bed is because they'll get up and they'll have a cigarette, or they'll have a cup of coffee, or they'll eat, or they'll watch something. Yeah. These things tell your body it's time to wake up. If you do that, you are really going to struggle going back to sleep. And then what you'll find is 8 hours later, at midday, when you should be doing something else, you'll want to take a nap. So please try and stay in bed. And last but not least, try and keep the same bedtime. If you've been struggling to sleep and your bedtime's gone out of sync, if you, for a solid 2 weeks, keep that same bedtime of 10 o'clock and get out of bed at, I don't know, let's say you've set the time of 5 or 6 o'clock, just do it routinely, regardless of how much you've actually slept between those hours, your body will find a way to recover.
And I must say, from someone that can't sleep, I often find that downloading an app on the iPhone or other tablets really helps. Those sort of mood musics, the sleep music, the mindfulness naps, they're very helpful. But if all of these things don't work, where do we go? What can we do?
Okay, so if general self-help techniques don't help your insomnia, or your insomnia is very, long, it's not short-lived because it's related to stress, but it's been going on for a very long time, you're constantly tired, I would go and see your GP. Okay, because your GP will do a simple assessment of whether you actually have a sleep disorder or not, and then based on that, and perhaps some further testing, they can then help you to get to the root of the problem. Because with insomnia, as we talked about earlier in the show, there's always a cause. It doesn't just happen. And it doesn't happen to a certain type of person either. It can happen to anyone at any time, and there are a number of causes. Once you know what the cause is, it's much easier to move forward.
Thanks, Chetna. And of course, you can find out more information about the things we've spoken about today on our website, bbc.co.uk/Three Counties Radio, where we'll provide links to Narcolepsy UK, Sleep Apnea Trust, and of course, tips to get yourself to sleep as well. That's it for another week. Thank you so much. We're back from 1 o'clock next Sunday. Take care.
Goodbye.